We're back with George Benson, and we're finding out about the early years, and now we're moving on through those years just a little bit. George, you've done so many things, and you're so good at so many things. It's a rare situation. But a lot of people don't realize that you actually started in the R&B world as a singer, entertainer, as well as a guitar player. What was it like, and what made you go into the jazz world, the straight-ahead jazz world after that?
I think it started when I went on the road with Jack McDuff. I was 19 years old, and he was a great organist, but he was trying to get a big band sound with a quartet. He had guitar, drums, and the organ, and a saxophone player. Red Holloway played sax, and there was a great drummer. His name was Joe Dukes. He was a very dynamic. No matter where we went, drummers from all over the city who were off would come and check us out because of him. But it was a great experience. I mentioned in one of our studies that Jack McDuff was a very tough band leader. He made me toe the line every night. I don't like what you're playing. You're playing, your sound ain't no good, and it made me worry about my sound. I went out and bought a Super 400 guitar thinking it was going to make my sound better. It got worse without the technique that goes along with it. It has no real meaning, but he woke me up to a lot of things.
What kind of things didn't he like? You said the sound, but was it the content of your solos too, or?
The content of my solo was I didn't have enough blues in it. And once I found out that's what he liked, I don't know if you ever heard any of those recordings, I became the blues man. Because I finally got a way to get him off my back. Give him what he wants. So I started playing more blues, I was going, now you're talking, now you're talking.
It's interesting. Larry Carlton has a similar story from the Crusaders. They wanted to get rid of him because he was playing all the blues, but he was playing in all the places he shouldn't have been. So they gave him a stack of records, and he went home and studied it. He realized, I'm in all the wrong measures.
Brilliant guitar player.
Oh, he is a brilliant player. So you were doing straight ahead for how many years?
Well, after I started my own band in New York in I was 22 years old, and I went to New York thinking I was going to become a star overnight. And my manager kept telling me, this was a guy who later became my manager. He said, when you start your own band, just come to New York and look me up. I got a gig for you. I'll make sure you work. So I took a trailer and went up to Buffalo, New York, and picked up a friend of mine, Lonnie Smith.
Oh, sure.
Who told me, man, when you start your band, come get me. So I called. I said, I'm starting my band. He said, come get me. So I did. I put the trailer on the back of my car, old raggedy Cadillac. Drove up to Buffalo, New York, came back to Pittsburgh, which was my hometown, went in my mother's basement, which was in the housing project. We practiced for about a week or two. Then we found a little local gig, and we practiced on this man's time,
Sure.
And then we said, we're going to burn New York down. So we went to New York and looked up the guy who became my manager, and he stuck us in a go-go house. We think we're going to play jazz and swing music, right? The good thing happened, though. While we were there, I found out that the club owner who told us, I don't want no jazz in here. I found out he didn't know what jazz was. And so we'd be swinging like crazy. And he'd sneak up beside and he'd say, that's not jazz you're playing, is it? I said, oh, no. No, this ain't jazz, man. When I found out he didn't know what jazz was, we played it all night after the Go-Go Girl got down. It was a smoking gig.
That's a great story.
And it was in the Bronx, New York. By the time we came out of the Bronx and went to Manhattan, the group was solid.
Oh, I bet.
And we ran into a great, we started a saxophone player whose name was Ronnie Cuber. Brilliant. One of the greatest musicians, I think, in the world. He always has been from day one. He just he had perfect pitch, but it didn't make it, he was never corny. He was always on the money. He played jazzy, he had great rhythm, knew the blues, and so he was a valuable asset to the band. By the time we got to New York City, the first or second week, we had made contact with CBS Records through John Hammond, who swore that I was the second Charlie Christian.
Okay.
My father liked that. When he heard that, he said, oh, they compare you to Charlie Christian now, huh? So it became, him and I became the best of friends, and he told me the best stories about how he brought Aretha Franklin to New York, and how he brought Count Basie to New York, and Billie Holiday, how he was involved with her career, and how Benny Goodman, he discovered Benny Goodman and put him in a position to have his own band. Charlie Christian, that story was spectacular. Would you like to hear a portion of that?
Absolutely.
Well, he said he had heard about this guitar player from Mary Osborne, who was a great guitar player herself. She said, no, the greatest guitar player in this world is a kid in Oklahoma City. So naturally, John Hammond took off in his car and rode to Oklahoma City. And he listened to him for a few nights, and he said, yes, he's everything she said he was and more. But he couldn't get him to leave because his brother was in the band, and he said, well, no, I just want to take you with me. I want to try to get you a gig with Benny Goodman. So he finally got him to leave, and they drove out from there to L.A., and I think they were at the Brown Derby. And he went backstage and said, Benny, I got the baddest guitar player you have ever heard. And he's African-American. He said, I can't put him in my band. He said, because I got a band full of African-Americans now, and I'm having a problem working. In those days, that was tough, you know.
Yeah.
So he said, no, I don't care how good he is, I can't hire him. So John Hammond, being determined, on a break, they were on a break, John Hammond put a stool on the bandstand and put his amp up there. And remember, electric guitar was not known then.
Yes.
And so when he came back off of the break, he saw Charlie Christian sitting on the stool, just like you and I are now, in front of the band. And he was very smart and discreet. He said, rather than make a fuss, I'll just play something he can't play. This is what Benny was thinking. That was the story he told later. And he started playing something way up tempo, I think Rose Room or something like that. Sure. Or Rosetta, da, da, da. And then everybody else played their solo, and then he looked at Charlie Christian, now what are you gonna do? And Charlie Christian lit into that song and burnt the house down. Everybody rose out of their seat and ran up to the bandstand, and he played that solo for 20 minutes. That was the
Yeah.
beginning.
Well, the rest is history after that, you know. Well, back to your history. After so many years doing mainstream and straight ahead jazz, you know, then you started inching into more of the pop world. Well, actually, it was the Creed Taylor years that kind of transitioned you. Is that true?
It's true. Creed Taylor, if people don't know who he is, Bossa Nova is a good music to link him to because he introduced it with Stan Getz and Joao Gilberto and Charlie Bird and so forth and so on. And later Jobim himself, the great one, not later, early. And he also made the organ popular. Jimmy Smith's big hit called Walk on the Wild Side.
Oh, yeah,
was him.
sure, yeah.
So he had a lot of firsts, and Wes Montgomery. He made Wes Montgomery the greatest jazz guitar player in the world. He made him a pop success. He cut things like Going Out of My Head with him and Wendy, you know, which I thought were just brilliant records.
Well, there was a Grammy for Going Out of My Head.
Yes, spectacular. Yeah. So I ended up, after Montgomery died, now this is an incredible story, but Montgomery mentioned to Herb Alpert, who was one of the owners of A&M Records, whom he was working for at the time. He said, you ever heard of a kid named George Benson? And Herb Alpert said, no. He said, you will. That's all he said. When he passed away, Herb Alpert asked Creed Taylor, who had been producing him, he said, man, have you ever heard of a guy named George Benson? And Creed said, yes, I know him. He said, you think you could get him for my record company? And he said, I'll try. You know? And that's how I bought my first house. So Montgomery did me the greatest favor in the world just by raising the question.
Sure. I remember those years vividly. There were great recordings. It was really new. It was really different. It was jazz with strings that most people could understand.
And we had Stanley Turrentine, Freddie Hubbard on the label. Ron Carter was giving the pulse to all those great records. And we had Don Sobieski writing arrangements for us. We couldn't miss. And then Grover Washington came in later, you know, and it was a great stable. And we did a tour, a set of concerts all over the world, you know, and they were very, very successful. And then all of a sudden, my records started inching up.
Sure.
Then Warner's got interested in me, you know. But I could see the way jazz was going, and Creed Taylor was right. Making it accessible to John Doe was very important. Because you mentioned the word jazz, you're talking about really old timers, people who grew up with the music, was part of their life.
Right.
I always use the example, if you're going to talk about somebody, don't sing the song, put another nickel in the Nickelodeon. because
Okay,
there
so
is no such thing as a Nickelodeon. Nothing costs a nickel.
Right. Well, you know, you've done an awful lot to bring a lot of people to jazz too, and it started way back when, and you're still doing it today, and we're all very appreciative. So that wraps up this segment, and we'll see you all later.